Oh, hi there, and welcome to this week's podcast of Happiness is an Inside Job. And I hope you've been keeping well and, above all else, treating yourself well since our last podcast. So, today we're going to kick off talking about people pleasing. So, it shows up in all our lives in some way, shape, or form. For some of us, it may show up in our personal relationships. Some it may show up in work, and for all of us, I think it shows up in different levels. So, what we're going to look at is, first off, what people pleasing is or where it comes from. It starts off as a protective response to trauma. It's inbuilt in us from children. It's one of our core safety strategies, and we can, depending on how we grew up and what we experienced, we'll all tend to choose a different core safety strategy or a mix of a few. And people pleasing can come in areas of dysfunction in the family where we learn to please or appease to get us what we want, to get our needs met. So behind people pleasing, it's an attachment style that we use to get others to return the favor, believing that if we please others, they will actually meet our needs for us. And as adults, unfortunately, people pleasing can be detrimental both to ourselves and the relationships that we're in. Because for one, I think the biggest loss to ourselves in people pleasing is we literally lose sight of who we are or what we want, because we're so wrapped up in pleasing others and meeting others' needs. We lose ourselves, and we don't know what it is that we want or need, and that breeds anger and frustration, because the nature of people pleasing is learning to turn your back on your own needs to please others. And how that has a detrimental effect on your relationships over time is with partners and friends. Our partners, our friends, our colleagues don't necessarily want us to please their pain away, to jolly up every situation when they're feeling sad, just to please them, to do so much as you can for them. Sometimes people just want to talk about how they're feeling. Sometimes a partner or a friend just wants to share what has happened without having someone else bombard them with lots of pleasing. Here, have this tub of ice cream, or trying to please over how that person is feeling. That's one way that it can certainly impact your relationships. And again, as I say, people pleasing comes from, there's a number of names on it. It's, it's known as attend or befriend. It's known as people pleasing. It's known as we have fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. People please falls under fawn. There's a number of different names it goes under, but the nature of that response is to please or to appease. So we'll look at what the two of them mean, to please and appease, and how they're possibly shown up in your life, in your relationships, and what you can do to change them. Because the person that's most unhappy when you're a people pleaser is yourself. Now, as I mentioned, the pleasing one is pleasing someone else, meeting every need that we think they want, to get them in return to meet our needs without actually having to ask them. And again, what can happen there is, when they're not meeting our needs because they just don't understand what it is that we want, we can then get frustrated, we can get angry with them. And again, because we're not asking for what we want, we're trying to get our needs met by pleasing the other person. And the other style that comes along with that is appeasing. Appeasing is where we're trying to avoid conflict. So we're trying effectively to get conflict to go away. So we're appeasing people. We're we're sounding like we agree with them, trying to plumase them. That's appeasing. And we believe it protects us from fights, from conflict. Appeasing usually shows up when we're dealing with what we believe is a controlling person, or we're in a dangerous situation. So we'll use it to skillfully have them think we're agreeing with them, we're appeasing them, we're plumazing them, we're, yeah, okay, no problem, that's fine. This one can tend to show up in work quite a bit rather than our personal relationships. We can kind of appease, smooth things over, avoid the conflict and not say. But what happens with appeasing is we're not really agreeing with that person. We're not really backing up what we're saying. We're going against our own values, what we actually believe is right, to avoid that conflict. So again, there's one quote that I tend to use quite a bit, and it's, to avoid conflict with others can create a war inside yourself. And this is where the appeasing behavior can lead to in your adult relationships. And as I've mentioned, this is a response we can have picked up as children, where it served a purpose back then to please and appease when we were in a situation where we were children. There wasn't another way to react. We couldn't fight. We were too young and too small. We couldn't fly. We couldn't pack our little lunchbox and leave the house. So we learned another mechanism, another way of surviving, another way of getting our needs met. But in our adult life, it potentially no longer serves us and actually causes more harm than good within our relationships. Some of the tendencies with people pleasers and appeasers is they can tend to feel weak, like they don't ask for what they need, or they give too much of themselves, and that can cause them, as I say, to feel weak within themselves, that they're not strong enough to ask what they want, or different things like that, which means within their adult life they're still feeling bad about themselves, or that they're not enough, they're not strong enough, they're weak. And the thing being, guys, this was, as I've mentioned, it comes in at childhood. This was a behavior that we brought in, that our system brought in, a safety mechanism for us to attach to our caregivers when we felt insecure or anxious. What we learned to do was become completely preoccupied with the other person's experience, with that parent's experience. Were we giving them enough, doing enough, pleasing them enough? Was our homework good enough? All of these things. And where we were coming from was, I will do anything that I need to do to secure attachment with you. But because maybe that parent wasn't fully emotionally available, or for whatever reasons, that, you know, it was abusive, there was neglect, there wasn't enough emotional understanding, or that parent was coming from their own pain and hurt and their own experiences, we probably never securely attached. It was anxious. You were always afraid that that person was going to leave, or you weren't going to get your needs met. So you learned to become and do whatever you needed to do and become whoever you needed to be to secure that your needs were met by that person. And it's not a weakness at all. It was a safety strategy, like the others, like fight, like flight. It was a safety strategy you brought in as a child to get your needs met. And because your system believed that that worked for you, it's one that you pull in, because we haven't always healed our wounds and worked on our past pain, or know ourselves enough to know what drives our behaviors. So looking at the reality of where you are now, because if you're a people pleaser in your adult life, it does not matter how much assurance you get from that other person that you're in a relationship with, be it your friendships or your significant other or someone you're dating, whatever it is, a boss. No matter how much reassurance that you get from them, it will never be enough to ease your anxiety, to stop you people pleasing, because that's not where the original pain came from. It was at your developmental stages that the issue came up. So it's rooted in your attachment with your primary caregivers. So it does not serve you now In fact, if anything, as they say, it puts you in conflict with yourself because you're feeling weak. You're feeling, I don't stand up for myself. I don't say what I need. I'm always giving at detriment to myself. I have no boundaries. I have really huge walls up around myself. It's all of these things. You become in conflict with yourself because of your nature to people please. So it's looking at your life now, where you're at now, and asking yourself some simple questions. And it's also taken on board as people pleasers. And I've certainly had huge chunks of it in my own life. I would have thought to be a people pleaser, a giver, would have made me really selfless. I give so much to others, I please everybody else. In fact, the nature of a people pleaser, again, like another strategy, it's to get our needs met without communicating what we actually need. And as I've mentioned, the saddest part about the people pleaser and the biggest consequence that it has, well, I believe it has, is you lose sight of who you are. As I mentioned, you've spent so many years pleasing others, trying to chameleon out, be what you thought they wanted you to be, that you've no idea who you are. And that becomes a huge part of your struggle. You don't know what it is that you want because you spent so long trying to give others what you thought that they want, and you didn't necessarily know it wasn't actually what they wanted. But that you lost sight of yourself. And what it creates over time is a significant disconnection from your sense of self, from who you are at your core. And you spend a huge amount of time like a beacon, like a monitor, monitoring other people's emotions, picking up on what's going on with other people, because you're that caught up in avoiding conflict and appeasing that you're constantly watching. You're in work, you're watching the room, you're sensing different emotions in people. You become highly observant and able to detect, because that's what you learned and that's what the behavior you've carried through. But you waste so much energy worrying so much about how others are feeling that you're neglecting how you're feeling and your true self and what it is that you want. Because for us, people pleasing is so widely accepted by society and it's a social norm, we can absolutely carry on believing that it's a positive, it's a plus, it serves us, it keeps everybody happy, and that can keep us carrying on with the behavior. When you're in absolute detriment to yourself, because if people pleasing or a people pleaser is completely related to your identity, to who you are, when that people pleasing isn't working, you're getting angry and frustrated and upset with yourself. You're killing yourself pleasing these people. You're exhausting yourself constantly picking up on their energy and how they are, to have them potentially leave anyway. Your greatest fear. And one of the first things we need to recognize is we cannot please out other people's needs. We need to know what other people's needs are. We need to ask ourselves, and we need to ask them what their needs are, what they want and what they need from us. And again, as I mentioned, guys, the biggest thing with people pleasing is we turn that anger and resentment in on ourselves, because we've killed ourselves pleasing, trying to be enough of what we thought that person needed. And they, as I say, they may leave anyway, or we're not showing up as who we are anyway. We develop an even bigger fear of, well, if I stop pleasing and actually just show up as who I am, they're going to walk away now. You'll see a lot of this at the start of relationships. An element of it creeps in, certainly. You'll see it when we get a new job. We're eager, we're excited, we're enthusiastic, but an element of people pleasing can certainly try and, creep in, where we may breach our own boundaries. Yeah, I can stay back Monday to Friday on that overtime when you know you're going to have to cancel 3 things. That's people pleasing. That's not keeping some boundaries in play. You could have really negotiated one evening. You can see it in relationships when we're starting out, when we start dating. Again, we're excited, we're in bitten by the love bug, that oxytocin is flying, and we, get really into the other person's activities. We want to be more like them. We want to aspire, and that's all good and fine. But it's when we're doing it to please them, when we're changing or trying to morph ourselves, we're trying to chameleon out, we're trying to be what we believe they want us to be. That's when it starts getting detrimental, because in your core, you're not showing up as yourself. And you'll have that feeling that you're eventually going to be found out, you're going to be caught out, and sure, it's all going to fall out of bed anyway. So then you're trying to run ahead of being caught out and being found out. So that fear is running in your system also. So it's looking at how to shift yourself out of people pleasing, something that doesn't serve you anymore, something that just it doesn't help you in your life. Avoiding conflict and trying to please people endlessly does not serve you. As I say, it leaves you in conflict with yourself. So looking at ways to start changing out of the people pleasing strategy is where we want to be going. So guys, another thing I do want to say here is, because I was talking there about interviews and, going into a new job or dating someone new, there's a huge difference between us wanting to show up as our best selves and people pleasing in trying to be everything the other person wants us to be, not ourselves, the version of ourselves they want, which is not actually necessarily ourselves. So it's perfectly and hugely normal for us to want to show up as our best selves, but that's the difference between that and people pleasing. Showing up as our best selves is being ourselves, the best version of ourselves. So what I want to look at with you now, guys, is what are the benefits to us from moving away from people pleasing? Because we know that, society loves a people pleaser, and for a while everybody loves a people pleaser because we can get a lot of our needs met, they do a lot for us. But over time, people pleasers actually can, as I say, have a detrimental effect on us. We don't want to be around them, because what happens with people pleasers is people pleasers are extremely agreeable. They agree to help you, they agree to help me, they agree to do so much for so many people that eventually people pleasers start letting people down. They can't be everywhere, they can't do all the things that they've committed to. The follow through starts falling off, the commitments they make, they aren't showing up. So what's happening is they're disappointing people because they're letting them down. But a people pleaser believes that people are getting angry at them because they're not doing enough, when people are actually getting angry at them because they're disappointing them, they're letting them down. But either way, that ends up with the people pleaser not meeting the needs that they set out to meet, because they've spread themselves too thin. So one of the ways out of people pleasing is, one of the biggest questions to ask yourself is, what will happen if I don't please everybody? Again, this is an old safety response that is no longer serving you. What will happen if you don't please people? What will happen? Here's a crazy one. What will happen if you please yourself? If you do something you want to do, or if you set beautiful, healthy boundaries? People pleasers don't necessarily know what they look like. They people please to the detriment of themselves till they're absolutely exhausted, they're worn out, they're in a headspin, and they're still not doing enough. They still feel under threat. So then people pleasers tend to build barriers, build walls to protect themselves, keep themselves in, because they haven't got the energy to keep giving out at that level. So one of the things to look at as a people pleaser is set boundaries to what you're saying yes and no to, and asking yourself, does that serve my old people pleasing strategy, which hurts me and doesn't keep people in my life? Or is that serving me and what I want, my dreams and my desires and my goals? And asking these questions before you just jump in and say yes. And another thing you can ask yourself is, what does it mean if I am not liked by absolutely everybody? Or here's another mad one. Do I like absolutely everybody? So does it matter? Because again, people pleasing, it's running, it's an automatic pattern that's running in the background. And we're possibly, we've been doing it for so long, we're just caught up in the behavior and we're feeling the frustration and the anger of it. And it's looking at the costs. Even as parents, when we're constantly always doing things for our children, stopping and asking yourself, could there be a negative at that? You know, what's the impact of me constantly doing everything, being everything for my children? What's the negative impact of that? And having to think about that. Because what will your children not learn from you behaving in that way? What skills that they need from life? What ways of behavior? What social norms? What will your children not learn from you doing and being absolutely everything? Being the chauffeur, being the taxi, being the whatever it is, constantly, and never learning to say no. Something I think that is absolutely paramount to learn from this, and one that we have to take away, is it's possible your children are learning that they're not able to say no. It's possible that that's what you're teaching them. You're teaching them not to set healthy boundaries. And a lot of the time, this doesn't tend to be something we want for our children. So it's really worth thinking about. We follow people's behaviours far more than we follow what they say. We watch what people do, and we all know that, guys. So it's worth bearing in mind when you think of when you're being the absolute everything for your children. Are you serving them? Another thing to look at is when we're people pleasing, as I've mentioned, appeasing is avoiding conflict. What uncomfortable conversations are you avoiding? Are you trying to completely please your boss to bits so he'll give you a pay rise without you actually having to ask because you're uncomfortable asking? Chances are he will just allow you to keep pleasing him to bits and not give you an extra penny because you're doing the work anyway. So is it serving you? It's looking at things like this, asking yourself, what triggers, what situations in your life do the please and peas come in? Is it in your personal relationships? Which ones? Friendships, male, female, significant other? Is it in work it really shows up? Is it in social gatherings? Where is it showing up in your life? And what's triggering it? When, you know, and what feeling is being triggered in you? Because it's the feeling that triggers the response, and it triggers the whole pattern kicks in then. So what is it that you're feeling? If you're feeling nervous, anxious, where are you feeling in your body? And what is your system telling you is going to happen? Oh, I'll be the odd one out. I'll be left here in the corner. They won't like me. They won't accept me. They won't let me. What is it? What's the feeling that's going on in your system? What is it that you're trying to avoid? And within relationships, again, looking at what happens if you don't please this person. What is it that you're trying to avoid? Because if you're constantly pleasing, you're not showing up as yourself. You're not, and you're certainly not getting your own needs met. So looking at these questions, guys, and turning them on yourself, start stepping you out of that people pleasing and appeasing mode. And it means that you get to actually show up as your amazing, fabulous self. And I read a quote there yesterday that I'd love to end on, because I think it's really, really beautiful. Someone, we don't know who at the moment, went to Michelangelo after he created his fabulous sculpture and said to him, how did you create something so amazing? And he said, what I created was already there. It was just hidden under the marble. And I think that's very true of us as humans. We don't have to be anything more than who we already are. We're just hidden under some of our behaviours that we believe protect us. And when we chip away them behaviours that are actually hurting us, there we are, beautiful, amazing, fabulous, and absolutely enough under all that crappy marble that we never needed anyway. So I hope, guys, you've enjoyed this episode, and coming into February when we're filled with all that Valentine's love, that is what we'll be putting quite a bit of focus on in February. Love, relationships, and all that beautiful fun stuff, all the intimacy, and taking a deep dive there. So please stay tuned, and if you do, I would absolutely love some of my listeners. I'm doing a fabulous event out in Killiney, Fitzpatrick Castle. It's a 2-day event with Freddie Jacquin, where an awful lot of our techniques, all my learnings over the years, are all being used to level people up from the places that they're stuck in, from where they are now to where they want to be, to move you forward within your communication, within your relationship, because again, happiness is an inside job, and it's our internal world that creates the drama in our external world. And it's learning to shift yourselves out of there and make those changes to move you forward, to bring you the happiness in your external world. So connect in with me if you want more details on the event, or look up my website, which is www.yourgifttoyou.com. And I will speak to you next week. Have a beautiful week, guys.